She was just the nurse. Nobody listened to her. Nobody cared if she spoke. But on that night, standing in the hallway of that silent mansion, she saw something she was never meant to see. Before we start, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Tell me where you're watching from and the time right now. I want to see who's here with us. Now listen closely. Aubrey Carter was 24 when they sent her to take care of an old man everyone in town said was already gone in every way that mattered. They said he didn't talk, didn't smile, didn't even look at the world anymore. But the moment she walked into his room, he looked at her like he had been waiting his whole life for someone to finally show up. And the first thing he said was not hello. He said, "If I tell you my secret, you cannot tell my family." Hold on to that. Because the family he was talking about was the kind that could bury the truth so deep the world would never find it again. And the secret? It was a name no one had spoken in that house for almost 30 years. Stay close. We're going into the mansion now. Aubrey stepped through the iron gates just as the sky began to gray with the first hint of evening. The mansion stood quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Vines wrapped the stone walls. The windows reflected nothing but clouds. The grass was trimmed perfectly, but it felt abandoned, cared for, but unlived in. The car that brought her pulled away, leaving her alone in the long driveway. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the one before it. The door opened before she knocked. A man in a dark suit stood there, tall, straight-backed. His hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes were unreadable. "You must be Nurse Carter." His voice was low, smooth. It echoed slightly in the emptiness behind him. "Yes," she said. "Aubrey is fine." He didn't return the courtesy. "I'm Silas. Follow me." He turned and she followed him inside. The house smelled like cedar and old paper, not stale, just untouched. Portraits lined the hallway, faces from different eras, men in tailored suits, women in elegant gowns, children who looked serious for no reason at all, none smiling, none with names. Silas led her up the staircase. The steps didn't creak. The silence followed like a shadow. "He has good days and bad days," Silas said without looking back. "You may speak when spoken to. He prefers quiet." Aubrey nodded, though Silas wasn't watching. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly open. Sunlight slipped through the gap, pale and thin. Silas knocked once. "Sir, she is here." A voice, faint but clear, answered, "Let her in." Aubrey stepped inside. The room was bright, lit by a tall window overlooking the water. The ocean was calm, barely moving, like it was listening too. In the chair by the window sat Everett Sloane. His frame was thin. His hands rested in his lap. His hair was white, soft, almost weightless. But his eyes were sharp, fully awake, observing her. He didn't speak at first. He just stared. Aubrey held his gaze without dropping it, not challenging him, just present. Finally, he said, "You're young." "And you're older," she replied. Silas froze like he expected the world to shatter. But Everett didn't get angry. He breathed out, slow, like releasing something heavy. "I like honesty," he said. Aubrey sat beside him, taking out her chart and checking his pulse, his oxygen, his breathing. Her hands moved calmly, practiced. Everett watched her the entire time. When she finished, she folded her hands. "Do you need anything?" she asked. He turned his head toward the window. "Yes, but not right now." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty. The waves moved, the light shifted, a gull crossed the sky. Then Everett spoke again. "Everyone here treats me like I've already left," he said quietly. Aubrey looked at him. "I don't." He turned his eyes toward her, and something changed in the room, something small, but real. He nodded once, like he accepted that. "Come back in the evening," he said. "There's something I want to tell you then." Aubrey stood, collected her things, and stepped toward the door. But before she left, Everett said, "And don't tell Silas." She stopped. Silas did too. The house felt like it shifted its weight. Aubrey stepped into the hallway. Silas closed the door behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They walked back down the long staircase, their footsteps soft against the polished wood. The house seemed to listen. Every whisper of movement echoed just enough to remind her how large it truly was. At the bottom of the stairs, Silas finally stopped. "He is not to be overexerted," he said, looking straight ahead. "Your shift ends at 8. Dinner is at 6. The kitchen staff will prepare a tray." Aubrey nodded. Silas paused, then looked at her directly for the first time. "Do not become involved," he said. His tone carried something underneath it. Not warning, not threat, something closer to fear. Aubrey held his gaze. "I'm here to care for him," she said. "That's all." Silas didn't respond. He simply turned and disappeared into one of the long hallways. Aubrey stood alone at the bottom of the grand staircase. The house loomed around her, wide, silent, watching. She set her bag down, exhaled slowly, and walked toward the kitchen. The kitchen was spotless. Stainless steel, marble counters, a long table with enough chairs for a family that no longer existed. A pot of water simmered quietly on the stove, though no one was in the room. Aubrey sat. The chair felt too straight, too formal, like everything here was meant for display rather than living. She ate a small meal without speaking to anyone. The household staff moved around her like trained motion, present but distant, barely looking at her, wordless. When the clock reached 5:30, she stood and made her way back to Everett's room. The hallway felt darker now. The day was fading. The sea wind had picked up, brushing along the windows in long, low sighs. She knocked once, then opened the door. Everett was still by the window, though the light was dimmer, his face lit by the last gold of the sun. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He simply said, "You came back." Aubrey sat. "I said I would." Everett shifted in his chair, slow, with effort. He looked toward the door, listening, though no one was there. Then he spoke softly, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and you must listen carefully." Aubrey kept her eyes on him. He didn't look weak now. He didn't look old. He looked like a man who had held a truth inside his chest for too many years. "Aubrey," he said, "I had a daughter." The ocean wind rattled lightly against the glass. He looked down at his hands. "She was my only child, and no one here speaks her name." Aubrey didn't interrupt. Everett continued, "I need you to find her." He lifted his eyes to hers. "She disappeared, and they told me to forget, to let it go, to pretend she never existed." His voice did not tremble, but the silence after did. Aubrey kept her breathing steady. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Everett stared at her for a long moment. "Because," he said, "you are the first person to walk into this house who did not look away from me." Aubrey nodded once. "I'll try," she said. Everett exhaled, the kind of exhale that comes after holding breath for decades. The room felt different now, not heavy, not haunted, expectant. Aubrey left the estate that night with Everett's words still echoing in her mind. The air outside was cool, the sky streaked violet, the first stars faint over the water. She walked down the driveway slowly, as though the house was still watching her. In her car, she sat for a moment before turning the key. She didn't know why she agreed. She only knew that she had. The next morning, she arrived early at St. Clair Memorial Hospital, logging into the system in the break room before her shift began. The other nurses were chatting about weekend plans, but their voices felt distant to her. She typed the name, Elena Sloan. Records appeared, but they were thin, sparse, too clean. A single line noted her death at age 32. Residence listed in Charleston. Cause of death, fire. No linked reports. No hospital admissions. No obituary. No media coverage. Just a sealed note. Case closed. Aubrey frowned. Fire deaths always leave paperwork. Insurance records, investigations, damage assessments. But here, there was nothing. At lunch, she sat alone outside by the hospital fountain, scrolling through old local newspaper archives on her phone. There were articles about the Sloan family from decades ago, business deals, charity galas, social events, but no mention of a daughter. Ever. Not even a birth announcement. It was as if she had been erased. Aubrey leaned back, staring up at the sky. Someone wanted Elena's existence hidden. From the hospital, from the city, from Everett himself. She closed her phone. This was not going to be easy. That evening, she returned to the mansion. Silas opened the door before she knocked, same as the day before. "You came back," he said. Not pleased, not surprised, just acknowledging a fact. Aubrey walked past him without hesitation. She climbed the stairs to Everett's room, her steps steady. He was awake, sitting upright, looking out at the ocean again. "Did you find anything?" he asked. Aubrey sat down. "I found records," she said, "but they feel wrong. They're too quiet." Everett's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "Quiet is expensive." Aubrey looked at him. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning." Everett's eyes closed, not in pain, in memory. He spoke slowly, each word heavy. She was born on a warm morning in June. Eleanor cried when she saw her. I had never seen her cry before. His voice was fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age. She was bright, strong-willed. She loved the water. She used to run down to the shoreline and I would chase her, pretending I could not catch her. A small, faint smile moved across his face, then faded. When she was 15, everything changed. Eleanor became sick, and I buried myself in work, in power, in building things that did not matter. His hand trembled slightly. And Elena, she slipped away, not all at once, little by little. I didn't notice, or I refused to. The room felt still. Even the ocean outside felt like it was listening. One day she was gone, and I was told to let her go, that she had made her choice, that she had burned. He turned his head toward Aubrey. His eyes were not sharp now. They were breaking. "I never believed it," he whispered. Aubrey leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then we don't stop here." Everett nodded once, a nod of a man placing the last piece of hope into someone else's hands. That night, Aubrey walked back down the hall. Silas was standing at the far end waiting. He didn't ask what they talked about. He already knew. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was low. "You shouldn't dig into things that were meant to stay buried," he said. Aubrey met his gaze. "Then you should have buried them better." Silas didn't answer. A cold draft moved through the hallway. The house felt awake now, watching, listening, waiting. The next morning, the air in the mansion felt different, not colder, not warmer, just more aware. Aubrey walked the hallway alone. The floorboards didn't make a sound. Every portrait seemed to follow her with its eyes. She reached Everett's door and knocked once before entering. He was awake, but quieter than before. He looked like he hadn't slept. "I want to show you something," he said. He pointed toward the far wall. A small key rested on the table beside his chair. Silver, worn, loved once. Aubrey picked it up. "End of the hall," Everett said. "Left side, the blue door." His voice held none of the strength it once did. Aubrey nodded and stepped out. The hallway felt longer than before, the windows dimmer, the house heavier. She reached the blue door and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The door opened. The room smelled faintly of lavender and pencil shavings. Sunlight poured in through gauzy curtains, soft and pale. Toys were arranged on shelves. Children's books lined the walls. A small rocking horse sat in the center of the room, still and untouched. Nothing was dusty. Nothing was faded. It was as if the person who lived here had just stepped out for a moment. Aubrey walked slowly, her hand brushing the edge of a wooden desk. There were drawings scattered on top, a child's handwriting, a girl's. She turned toward a shelf where a small red journal sat. The leather was worn at the spine, but the pages inside were crisp. Aubrey opened it. The handwriting was not a child's. It was an adult's, careful, steady. I came back today. The curtains were open. The next page. He left the lamp on. Same one, same light. Another. I don't know if he knows. I don't know if I want him to. Then, near the back, I come back every year on my birthday. I wonder if he remembers me. Aubrey exhaled slowly. The room felt warmer now, like a breath was living there. She closed the journal gently and took it with her. She returned to Everett's room. He looked up the moment she entered. He didn't need to ask. Aubrey placed the journal on his lap. He stared at it. His hands hovered, like touching it might break something inside him, but he opened it. He read only one line. Then he closed the journal and pressed it to his chest. His voice cracked for the first time since she met him. She was here, he whispered. Aubrey said nothing. There was nothing to say. Everett looked past her, toward the window, toward the ocean he had watched for years without really seeing it. He whispered her name. Elena. It sounded like a prayer. The air in the room felt still. Then Everett spoke again, barely audible. You need to speak to Silas now. Aubrey nodded and stepped out into the hallway. Silas was already waiting. This time he didn't hide behind silence. He closed the door behind them and lowered his voice. I knew she came back, Silas said. I saw her at the gate, every year. Aubrey didn't look away. Why didn't you tell him? Silas's expression didn't change. Because she never came in. A pause. Because he was not ready. Another pause. Because sometimes love waits too long. The hallway felt narrow, cold, full of all the things no one ever said. Silas turned and walked past her. Aubrey didn't follow right away. She stayed there, in the quiet, with the truth hanging soft and heavy in the air. That evening the house was darker than before. Clouds had gathered over the shoreline, dimming the last of the sun. Thunder rolled somewhere far out at sea. Aubrey returned to Everett's room with the journal still in her hands. He hadn't moved from his chair. He looked like he was listening to something only he could hear. The soft echo of memory. Aubrey sat down beside him, but she didn't speak. The silence felt necessary. Everett finally lifted his eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said. His voice was thin but steady. She was my child, my blood. But when Eleanor died, I buried myself in business, in control, in being needed by the world. I thought power would keep me from losing anything else. A pause. It didn't. Aubrey watched him, quiet, present. Everett breathed in slowly, his hands folded in his lap. Elena was 16 when she began to disappear from me. It was not sudden. It was the slow kind of leaving. The kind you don't notice because you believe love will hold someone in place. Lightning flickered beyond the window, pale and distant. She left with someone I told her not to trust. Someone who wanted something from me. Someone who hated what I built. I tried to stop her, but she only saw control. His shoulders sagged. And then she was gone. Aubrey's fingers rested lightly on the chair arm, steady. Everett continued. I sent people to look for her. For years. But the world has corners you can't search with money. And when the report came about the fire, they told me to let go. That grief was unbecoming. That a man like me should move forward. He shook his head. But I never believed she died. He turned to Aubrey again. She came home, he said, and I never knew. The words did not rise. They fell. Aubrey's voice was soft. She didn't stay because she didn't know if you wanted her to. Everett closed his eyes. I didn't know how to show her I did. The storm outside grew louder. Rain began tapping the window. Aubrey watched him, the fragile shape of him, the years that had etched themselves into every line of his face. She didn't touch him. She didn't have to. They sat in the quiet. The house listened. The ocean breathed against the shore. Everett exhaled, slow and long. "Aubrey," he said, "there is something more." Aubrey waited. There is someone who knows where she went next. He looked toward the door. Silas. The room seemed to hold its breath. Aubrey stood. Everett nodded once, the smallest motion. She left the room and walked the hallway back to the stairwell. The air felt thicker now, the house more awake. Silas was standing in the foyer, hands folded behind his back, as if he had been waiting for her. He did not ask what Everett had said. He simply turned and walked toward the lower level of the house. Aubrey followed. They descended a narrow staircase, the walls lined with framed photographs no one had dusted in years. The air grew cooler, still, almost untouched. Silas stopped at a wooden door and placed his hand on it. He loved her, Silas said quietly, just not well. He opened the door. Inside was a small study. Paper files, old letters, newspaper clippings, receipts, travel records, maps, all carefully organized, all evidence of a search that had never truly stopped. Silas stepped aside. "This is where you continue," he said. Aubrey walked inside. The light bulb buzzed overhead. Rain tapped the small window. She sat. She began reading. The study smelled like dust and old ink, the kind of air that comes from rooms that remember more than they reveal. Aubrey sat at the desk. A small lamp lit the papers in a warm circle, everything beyond fading into shadow. She opened the first file. Receipts from bus stations along the East Coast, dates spread across years, different cities, different seasons. But one location appeared again and again. Savannah. She checked the next folder. Photographs printed from security cameras. None were clear, none confirmed anything, but the shape, the posture, the way the head tilted slightly when walking, it matched. Aubrey continued. There were letters, too. Never sent, written in Everett's handwriting. "I am still here. I should have held you tighter, not tried to hold the world. I do not know if I deserve forgiveness." The ink changed over the years, darker, then lighter, then trembling. Aubrey set the final letter down. Silas stood in the doorway. "You said she came back every year," Aubrey said. Silas nodded once. "At the gate. For a moment. She never crossed." Aubrey looked at him. "Why Savannah?" Silas stepped farther into the room, hands clasped. "Her mother loved Savannah. Before the charity galas, before the private flights, before the name Sloan meant anything. She used to say the air there tasted softer." Aubrey understood, not in words, in silence. She closed the last folder and stood. "I need to tell him," she said. Silas did not move. He already knows. The house was quiet as Aubrey walked back upstairs. The rain outside had softened. The storm had passed. Everett was still by the window, but his eyes were closed, not asleep, just resting within himself. Aubrey sat beside him. He opened his eyes slowly. "Well?" he asked. Aubrey didn't soften the truth. "She went to Savannah. She kept returning here, every year." Everett inhaled, the breath catching just once. "She was waiting for me," he said. Aubrey nodded. "Yes." Something shifted behind Everett's eyes. Not relief, not pain, recognition. "I thought time would give her back to me," he said. "But time does not return what you do not go to retrieve." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And now," he said, "I have almost no time left." Aubrey did not look away. "When the time comes," she said, "I'll find her." Everett's head bowed, not like defeat, more like surrender. "Aubrey," he said. "Yes." If I am gone when she arrives, tell her I never stopped trying." The air held still. Aubrey spoke softly. "You have my word." Everett's breathing steadied, slow, measured, sure. The ocean outside moved in long, gentle waves. The house grew quiet again. Not the cold quiet from before, a quiet that waited. The next few days moved slowly. Everett grew quieter, as though his voice was something he was saving, not spending. He slept more often, drifting in and out like someone listening to music far away. Sometimes he spoke Elena's name under his breath. Sometimes he simply watched the water. Aubrey stayed near him. She kept the room warm, adjusted his pillows, read aloud when his eyes were too tired to stay open. Silas moved through the house like a shadow. He spoke little. He watched everything. The storm had passed, but the waves still carried the memory of it, crashing against the shore in slow, steady rhythms. One morning, Aubrey opened the curtains earlier than usual. The sunrise cast a pale gold across Everett's face. He did not stir. She took his hand gently. It was warm, but his breathing was thin. "Everett," she said softly. His eyes opened, but only just. He looked at her, and for a moment there was nothing old about him, just a father who had loved someone he lost. "Aubrey," he whispered. She leaned closer so he didn't have to strain. "She will come," he said. There was no doubt in his voice. Aubrey nodded. "I'll be here when she does." Everett's eyes moved toward the window, the sea, the horizon. His voice was faint now. "Tell her." He paused. The silence held itself completely still. "Tell her I was waiting." A long breath left him. Aubrey waited, but no breath returned. She kept holding his hand, not to keep him here, but so he did not go alone. The waves outside kept moving, the light kept shifting. The room did not know yet, not fully. Aubrey sat with him until the stillness became real. Then she stood and walked to the hallway. Silas was already there. He did not ask. He closed his eyes once, not in grief, in acknowledgement. Aubrey returned to the room. She closed the curtains. She laid a blanket across Everett's chest. She placed the red journal beneath his hand. The house was silent, but not like before. This silence had weight, presence, memory. Aubrey stepped outside onto the porch and breathed in the salt air. The world continued. The sun rose. The waves did not break rhythm. Life went on. But inside the house something had shifted. Something had finished. And something else was waiting to begin. The funeral was small. No headlines, no cameras, no long speeches. Just a closed casket, the sound of the ocean nearby, and the soft rustle of wind moving through the old oak trees that lined the property. A pastor spoke a few quiet words. Silas stood like a statue beside the grave. Aubrey kept her hands folded, the red journal pressed against her chest. When it was done, the staff drifted away. The driver left. The pastor bowed and returned to his car. Soon, only Aubrey and Silas remained. The day was still, the sky pale. Silas looked at the ground where Everett now rested. He feared dying alone more than dying itself, he said. Aubrey looked toward the mansion. He wasn't alone. Silas nodded, once, slow. A gull cried overhead, circling before gliding out toward the water. Aubrey stayed until the workers finished the burial. She watched the last shovel of earth fall quiet and final. Then she walked back toward the house. The gravel crunched under her shoes. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and seagrass. Inside, the mansion felt different, not empty, just waiting. Aubrey stood in the foyer, unsure what came next. She had done what she was meant to do. Her job, in every official sense, was finished. She should have left, but she didn't. Something kept her there, something unfinished. Days passed. The house grew quieter. Silas moved through his routines with practiced calm. Aubrey stayed in one of the guest rooms on the second floor. Just until things were settled, she told herself. One afternoon she stood on the balcony overlooking the long driveway. The sun was high, the cicadas hummed in the trees, and then she saw her. A woman stood at the gate, still, composed, her hand resting lightly on the iron bars. She was older now, late 40s perhaps. Her hair pulled back loosely, touched by silver at the temples. Her posture was familiar, the same slight tilt of the head, looking at the world softly, not as if she feared it. Aubrey walked down the steps and across the gravel driveway. Slow, steady. The woman didn't move. She waited. When Aubrey reached her, she stopped only a few feet away. The woman's voice was quiet. "Is he gone?" Aubrey nodded. The woman closed her eyes, just once. Her breathing caught, barely, not loud, not dramatic, just real. Aubrey reached into her pocket and took out the necklace from the photograph, the silver one with the initials. She held it out. "He wanted you to have this." The woman took it carefully, like it might break if she closed her hand too tightly. She looked at the house. Her voice was soft. "I wasn't ready." Aubrey nodded. "He waited for you." The woman swallowed. "And I waited for him." The wind moved through the trees. The ocean murmured beyond the cliffs. Time felt very slow. Aubrey opened the gate. The woman stepped inside, not as a stranger, not as a ghost, but as someone coming home. They walked together toward the house, gravel shifting beneath their steps. The mansion rose quiet and still against the sky, holding years no one had spoken out loud. Aubrey led her through the foyer. No staff came forward, no doors opened. The house seemed to be watching, waiting. They reached Everett's room. The door stood half open, just as it had the morning he passed. The woman stopped before entering. Her hand rested on the doorframe, her fingers tightening for a moment. She stepped inside. The chair was still by the window. The blanket was still pulled neatly across the bed. The air still carried the faint trace of cedar and ocean salt. She walked to the window and placed her palm against the glass. Her voice was quiet. "He always loved this view." Aubrey stood behind her, giving space, letting the moment breathe. The woman looked back. "What did he say at the end?" she asked. Aubrey spoke simply. "He said he was waiting." The woman's jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She nodded once. A small, controlled motion. Then Aubrey reached into her pocket and held out the red journal. The woman's breath caught. Not loud, just enough to break something inside the stillness. She took the journal slowly and opened it to the middle. Her handwriting, her words, her voice from years she didn't want to forget, but couldn't bear to remember. She ran her fingers over the ink, tracing the shape of who she had been. The room stayed silent. No one rushed her. No one explained anything. No one tried to soften it. She closed the journal and held it to her chest. "Thank you," she said. Aubrey nodded. The woman turned back to the window and looked out at the ocean. "I wasn't staying away because I hated him," she said. "I stayed away because I thought he hated me." The waves rolled in slow, steady movements. "I thought I ruined everything," she said. "My mother died, and I ran, and I didn't know how to come home." Aubrey's voice was soft. "He never stopped loving you." The woman's shoulders trembled just once, not enough to make a sound, just enough to break the silence. She whispered, barely audible, "I was just a child." The house held the moment like a secret it had been waiting decades to release. Aubrey stepped closer, gently. "You're here now." The woman nodded. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sea. "Yes," she said, "I am." The next days passed quietly. The woman stayed in the mansion, though she spoke very little. She moved through the rooms slowly, almost carefully, touching corners of her childhood, as if afraid they might fade under her fingers. She stood in the hallway where her height had once been marked in pencil on the doorframe. She paused at the grand piano in the parlor, where her mother used to play in the evenings. She walked by the dining room table where chairs were always set for guests who never mattered as much as the two people sitting side by side at the end. The house that had been asleep for years seemed to breathe again, not loudly, just enough to be felt. Aubrey stayed nearby, but she didn't hover. Some healing happens without words. Silas observed from a distance. His presence softened. Not guarding this time, witnessing. One afternoon, the woman opened the door to the child's room. She stood there for a long time, her silhouette still, framed by the doorway. Aubrey watched from the hall, but did not step inside. The woman approached the small desk. Her fingers moved across the drawings scattered there. Flowers, a lighthouse, the ocean. Her childhood world had been simple before life made it heavy. She went to the rocking horse and placed a hand on the worn handle. It did not move. It had waited too long for that. Finally, she sat on the floor beside the bed and opened the red journal again. Pages turned softly beneath her fingertips. She read in silence. Not to remember. To reclaim. As the light changed through the window, she closed the journal and held it against her chest. She whispered something then, too quiet for Aubrey to hear, but the way she stood afterward was different. Something inside her had stopped running. That evening, the woman came to the sitting room where Aubrey was arranging blankets. She didn't hesitate. "My name is Elena," she said. Her voice was steady now. Aubrey looked at her and nodded once. "Would you like tea?" she asked. Elena exhaled slowly, as though releasing years all at once. "Yes," she said. They sat in the quiet room as the sky outside deepened into early night. The kettle hummed softly in the kitchen. Silas placed 2 cups on the table and left without a word. Aubrey poured. Elena wrapped her hands around the warmth. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It was allowed. Then Elena said, "I didn't come sooner because I didn't know how to face what I had lost." Aubrey listened. "And I didn't come inside all those years because I was afraid the house would remember me," Elena continued. She looked toward the window where the sea was fading into darkness. "But it's remembering again, and I think maybe I needed to remember too." Aubrey nodded slowly. "You are here now," she said. Elena's expression softened. "Yes," she replied, "and I'm ready to stay." The house seemed to settle around them. Not the grief-filled quiet from before, a different kind. A quiet that knew something had finally come home. The legal matters began the next morning. A black sedan pulled up the long driveway, quiet and deliberate. An attorney stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase that looked as old as the house itself. He introduced himself simply. Mr. Sloan left clear instructions. Elena nodded and led him inside. They sat in the study, the same room where Aubrey first saw the search files, the room that had once held nothing but longing. Now it held the 3 of them. The attorney opened a folder and placed it gently on the desk. Everett's handwriting, not shaky, not fading, steady. The attorney read, "If I pass before my daughter returns, the house, the land, and the foundation will belong to her. If she does not return, the estate transfers to the Ocean Recovery Trust." Silas stood in the corner, silent, hands behind his back. Elena did not speak. She only listened. The attorney continued, "This home is to remain preserved, not renovated into something new, not sold, not dissolved. It is to remain a place where what was lost can come back." He looked up. "There is no dispute. This is final." Elena placed a hand on the journal in her lap. She closed her eyes once, then she nodded. "I understand." The attorney stood, closed the briefcase, and left without ceremony. The door clicked shut. Silas stepped forward, but only just. He did not bow. He did not make a speech. He simply said, "Welcome home, Miss Elena." Elena looked at him. Her expression changed softly. "You knew I would come." Silas nodded. "Yes." She held his gaze. "Did he?" Silas did not rush the answer. He hoped. That was enough. Aubrey spent the afternoon gathering her things from the guest room. There was no need to stay now. Her work was done. She folded her scrubs carefully, placed her badge in her bag, tied her hair back. She took one last look around the room. Neutral tones, quiet space, soft light. A place where she had waited beside grief and watched truth return. She picked up her bag and walked down the staircase. Elena was standing near the front door. She didn't try to stop her. She simply said, "Thank you." Aubrey nodded. "You should rest," she said. Elena gave a small breath of a laugh. "I think I can now." Aubrey opened the front door. The sea breeze moved through the house behind her. Before stepping out, she turned back one last time. Elena stood in the foyer, Silas at a respectful distance behind her, the house quiet but no longer empty. Aubrey spoke softly. "He waited for you." Elena's eyes glistened. "And I know that now." Aubrey stepped outside. The sun was setting, soft gold stretching across the driveway. She walked away from the house, but not like someone leaving, like someone who had finished something important. Aubrey didn't go far. She walked down the narrow path that led from the estate to the shoreline. The same path Everett had once walked with Elena as a child. The same path Elena had stood near when she returned each year, but never crossed. The ocean was calm that evening. Small waves rolled in steady, quiet rhythms. The wind moved gently across the tall grass. Aubrey set her bag down and sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water. She watched the horizon. It stretched wide and endless. Something about it made everything feel both small and meaningful at the same time. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn. Elena sat down beside her. No greeting, no explanation, just presence. They watched the water together. After a long while, Elena spoke. "When I left, I thought distance would fix what was broken." The waves moved in, then out. "It didn't," she said. Aubrey didn't answer. There was nothing to add. Elena continued. "I would come back to the gate for years. I could never walk inside. I thought he would look at me and see the reason for everything that went wrong." A seabird skimmed the surface of the water. "But he wasn't looking for blame," Aubrey said. Elena nodded slowly. "No," she said. "He was just looking for me." They sat in silence again. Aubrey stood. Elena did too. They began walking along the shoreline, the sand cool beneath their feet. The tide washed over their steps and erased them behind them. Elena looked toward the house. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "You don't have to," Aubrey replied. Elena breathed in the salt air. The wind tugged lightly at her hair. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, something in her expression had changed. Lighter, less guarded, more certain. She turned back toward the mansion. "I'm ready to go home now," she said. Aubrey nodded. They walked back up the sandy path, side by side. No rush, no urgency. The ocean remained behind them, steady and constant. The house rose before them, quiet but alive. Waiting. The mansion felt different when they returned. The silence was no longer the kind that hid sorrow. It was a quiet that made room for breath. Elena walked through the foyer and into the sitting room. She opened the curtains wide, letting in the late afternoon light. Dust floated softly in the golden beams. The room warmed. She touched the grand piano, her fingertips resting on the glossy surface. She sat, not to play, but to remember how it felt to sit there. Aubrey watched from the doorway and said nothing. Later, workers arrived, not the kind that tear down, the kind that restore. Furniture was polished, windows cleaned, the garden trimmed back to its natural shape. Elena didn't command. She guided. She brought the house back to life slowly, with care, as though she was waking something gently from sleep. Silas remained close, always present, but no longer guarding anything. His steps were quieter now, not heavy with caution. In the evenings, Elena walked through the house holding the red journal. Sometimes she read, sometimes she simply held it. She moved through the rooms the way one moves through memory, open-handed, accepting, and without hurry. One night, before sunset, she stood at the shoreline where the grass met the sand. Aubrey joined her. They didn't speak at first. Elena's voice came softly. "I spent so many years convinced I had ruined everything," she said, "and he spent so many years convinced he had." A wave rolled in and fell softly against the shore. "And all it ever took was one conversation," she said. "Just one, and we never had it." She looked toward the horizon, her face calm. "But we have time now, not to change what happened, just to live with it." Aubrey nodded. "He wanted peace. You have given that to him." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "And now I think I can give it to myself." The sky shifted to soft pink and amber. The tide carried the day forward, unhurried. They walked back to the house together, not to finish anything, but to begin. The season began to turn. The mornings grew warmer. The light lingered a little longer each day. The mansion no longer felt like a monument to grief. It felt lived in. Windows were open more often. Fresh air moved through the halls. The scent of coffee and ocean salt drifted together in the early hours. Elena walked the grounds each morning, her footsteps steady along the gravel path. She didn't trace the past anymore. She simply moved through the present. Silas tended the garden, pruning roses with careful hands. He didn't look over his shoulder anymore. He didn't listen for ghosts, because there were none. Aubrey visited often, not every day, just enough. She would sit with Elena on the back porch, overlooking the water. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Silence no longer held weight. It rested gently. One afternoon, Elena stood in the doorway of her father's room. The chair was still by the window, the blanket still folded neatly, the sea still stretching endlessly beyond the glass. She walked to the window and opened it. The air moved in, warm, clean, living. She whispered his name once, not with sorrow, not with longing, just with love. Then she turned away. She didn't close the door behind her. The house no longer needed doors closed. On her last evening before returning to her own life for a time, Aubrey stood at the shoreline again. The tide washed over the sand in slow, soft waves. She looked back at the mansion. Its windows caught the last of the sunset, glowing softly from within. No shadows, no silence pressed tight against the walls. Just a home. The wind carried the scent of lavender and salt, the same scent that lived in the child's room, the scent that had waited. Aubrey closed her eyes once, just long enough to let the moment settle. Then she turned and began to walk. Not away, just forward. The ocean moved. The light faded. The world breathed. And the house on Harborview Road stood steady, no longer holding sorrow but memory. Alive again.